Hello world, Mr Girlymicro here from foreign climes, the colonies as they were, with another episode of IPC on Tour. That's Infection Prevention
and Control.
And Control. I suppose, but you can try. So yes, we are still in New York, having an amazing time, having a fantastic time. And this past Sunday was the New York City Marathon. Something we've always wanted to do, but didn't manage to get in this time. Nothing to do with our vastly underpreparedness. And so, being as that was happening in the city, we decided to head out of the city and avoid some of the congestion. And so we jumped on the train to Coney Island.
From Coney Island to the Sunset Strip is one of the songs that starts off one of my favourite films, Christmas movies, which I love of all time. And therefore I've always wanted to go to Coney Island, and therefore it was our chance to go and visit.
And which movie was that?
Serendipity. Serendipity is the reason we came to New York on our honeymoon.
Was that the Ghostbusters Firehouse?
I mean, yeah, why? How could we not?
And the Friends Apartment.
So many movie themed things, but it's one of my favourite movies, and it just is all Christmas to me. And anyone who reads the blog or knows me in person
and Escape from New York
knows that I adore Christmas so much. And so
and Die Hard 3.
Yeah, okay, all of the movies. All of the movies.
And Coney Island, The Warriors, obviously.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I digress. But anyway, so Coney Island, being as it is now November, the fun fair was and the rides and the oldest wooden roller coaster in the country, if not the world, was shut for the season. For
which Mr Girlymicro was really happy, by the way, because I made him go on far too many roller coasters this year already.
Because I'm a big coward. I don't like thrill rides. But you know, we're in the first week of November, and it's still 24 degrees centigrade, which is kind of very strange to be wandering up and down the seafront in shorts at the beach first week in November. But it was great being there, being on the boardwalk and taking the sights of the seaside, and it was just nice getting out of town. And it was also nice discovering that we could jump on a subway in Midtown, and then for a single fixed price of $2.75 as it is at the moment, I got all the way to Coney Island to the seaside and then back again.
So you'll be asking yourselves, what is this to do with infection control?
I was wondering that just myself.
So the reason we wanted to talk about it is...
Or do we have something to talk about?
Oh, yeah, we do.
Do we need to talk?
We do. I was fairly horrified. So I spoke last time about how amazing the COVID guidance was when we went to see Stephen Colbert at the Late Show. And so we were just waiting to come back, and suddenly we get to the subway, and what do we spy?
What? What do we spy?
We spot a guy with some form of boa constrictor or
python. Yeah. A big snake. And when I say big snake, it was getting on for... It must have been 10, 12 foot long.
Yeah, I mean enormous.
It was the thickness of a loaf of bread.
Yeah. And
which I believe is an imperial unit of measurement.
He just pulls it out of this shopping cart.
I mean, effectively, he's a panhandler, isn't he? He's getting people to take photos and give him money for posing with this thing.
That and a cockatiel is just sitting on the... And so this guy just, pulls up outside the subway and starts pulling out this exotic pet.
Quite the biggest snake I have ever seen, even including the ones I've seen in zoos.
And so that is, I know we've gone here via circuitous route, the reason I wanted to talk about infection.
See, we're talking about animals, this really should be a shaggy dog.
I mean, yeah, definitely a shaggy dog story. Because I think it's both fascinating and horrifying that the regulations here, now God knows whether this is legal or not, so this is purely from talking about somebody who just saw this happen on the street, that somebody could pull out an exotic pet in the middle of the street, just a standard pavement, and effectively encourage people to interact with it with no licensing, no regulation, probably no idea what would happen if if someone got bitten, not necessarily by the snake, but cockatiels are vicious beasts. I know this because my stepmother has one, and it called Oscar, and it bit a lot.
And that snake was big enough to eat probably several small children.
Yeah, and reptiles are linked with infection risk.
But you've always said whenever any of us have encountered a reptile, be it as a pet or whatever, you've always talked about washing your hands afterwards because of the unpleasant things they carry, such as
so salmonella risk particularly, and this is a situation where it's obviously there to kind of encourage young children to interact and for their parents to therefore pay money. Possibly not be eaten, but they could definitely do something. And in the middle of the street, well, I don't know about your streets, but ours generally, we have not encountered a lot of hand hygiene facilities. There's nowhere that these kids could then interact with these animals.
It's the seaside.
Yeah, we're not even talking about washing your hands in the sea. And by the way, this is the only beach I've ever seen where there are huge fragments of glass just in the sand that I took my shoes off, and you will all know that I'm rather risk averse as a personality type. That's probably how I got involved in infection control, right? I am not probably the most kind of running into the sea kind of girl, but I was so excited by seeing the sea that I took off my shoes, my nerdy shoes that have equations all over them, in order to walk barefoot in the sand for about 5 steps before I saw quite how much broken glass was hidden in that sand. And then I promptly put them back on and swore never to do it again. So the combination of infection risks at Coney Island were somewhat greater than I had predicted.
And I suspect a lot of that glass may have been because it was the weekend, it was a Sunday morning. So, over the Saturday night there may have been people imbibing. And, during the high season, I suspect the beach would be cleaner. And so I don't want to put people off Coney Island because it was fab.
It was amazing.
But that particular bit you're trying to walk across, I wouldn't recommend doing it without shoes.
So it's just an interesting thing, I think, that in an area where at one side you've got this great kind of focus on infection and control of one specific organism. On the other side you've got this kind of free-for-all in terms of mobile risk that's pretty unregulated. And I don't know, it'd be really interesting to know if people have ever encountered that in countries where they live. When I was a kid, we used to have someone called the Animal Man that came into my school, but you all had to kind of wash your hands, and then if you interacted with anything, you then had to wash your hands. It was a really controlled thing. It wasn't just in the middle of the street. Obviously, my experience of all of this is very much biased by the Tiger King documentary on Netflix. So this is not a well-researched piece at all.
Certain states do have to have somewhat lax rules controlling the possession of exotic pets.
Yeah. So I just thought it was a really interesting thing to think about, how something that's really probably every day in terms of interaction with animals, pets, things that are set up for kids' entertainment could actually lead to kind of unforeseen consequences. Every year we get kids admitted with hemolytic uremic syndrome who've gone to petting zoos, who haven't washed their hands appropriately after...
Okay, so hang on. Hemolytic what?
Uremic syndrome. So it's kind of kidney issues post E. coli 0157 infection normally.
So they would potentially catch E. coli from reptiles?
No, so these are usually petting zoos.
I'm trying to link...
So these are usually petting zoos. So people will go and they'll pet baby calves or baby sheep, interact with pigs where there's feces present.
Pygmy goats.
I love a pygmy
goat. Like a London zoo.
Love a pygmy goat. And then if you don't wash your hands appropriately, and these kids then put their hands in their mouths and they get fecal flora on them.
Okay, so there's nothing that the zoos or anything are doing wrong. It's about making sure you wash your hands afterwards.
Yeah,
just to labour the point.
Yeah. So all of this stuff is not that it can't happen, right? People can have pets. People can interact in these kinds of environments. Although obviously we'd like to know that they're fully legal and the pets are taken care of and the animals are well taken care of. And
if you had your way, they'd all have a big plastic screen between them and the animal. Yes, I understand.
I mean, risk-averse girl. But it's also about how we then have those conversations about how do you do this safely, right? Doing it in the middle of the street where you can't wash your hands afterwards and the kids then might go and run and grab an ice cream and therefore ingest salmonella with their ice lol is probably not the safest place to do this. Eating a sandwich kind of in the middle of your fecal flora after like playing in the mud, probably not the safest place to do it.
And then going on a big dipper.
Yeah.
Or a big wheel.
Yeah. And so like how do we come back to this conversation? All of this stuff all comes back to communication, doesn't it? One of the things that I really liked about Colbert was the communication about risk, wasn't it? And the teaching people to wear a mask appropriately. Like, how good are we at teaching people in how to control the risks? Because people see, like, entertainment and a lot of that stuff goes out of their mind. They don't think of it as ever being a risky piece of behaviour. So that's kind of how we ended up wanting to talk to you about Coney Island and infection control.
Indeed. Now, also on a different subject, away from IPC on tour, it's the US midterms tomorrow, and you are drinking from a mug with a particular message on it.
I am. So we went to the UN today, and I have brought myself "Women's rights are human rights" on a mug. So
It calls very close to your heart.
It is incredibly close to my heart. I think that women's capacity to control their bodies, not just in terms of reproductive capacity, but in all kinds of ways, actually is fundamental to us all succeeding across the globe in terms of societies. It's incredibly important in countries like Mali, where I'm doing research work in terms of women being able to support their families, to actually be well enough to take care of their households in order to actually gain independence and contribute to well-being. But also, I think it's important to have the conversation in the States about the fact that reproductive control is being taken away in a country where I currently am. And if I got pregnant here, then those of you that have listened to the blog post about my sister will know how dangerous that could be for my life and my outcome, in a way that would never lead to actually me giving birth to a fully healthy child. And so it's not something people want to talk about, but it's really important. And so I have brought a mug and I will drink out of it and hope that it will spark conversation about the fact that this isn't about going against anyone's beliefs or imposing beliefs on other people, but it's about how important it is that women's rights, whether reproductive or not, are supported and part of the conversation.
So if you are a listener who's stateside and you do vote, we hope you take that. We hope you take that into account.
Yeah, we're not political, but, women's rights are human rights, and I hope that we could all agree on that.
Indeed.
So thank you very much for listening. I think it's really clear that we really want you to go and wash your hands if you're playing with any form of animal. Hand hygiene, and keep safe.
Indeed. And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. All opinions on this podcast are our own.